everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes open to a $55 to $56 million domestic opening, which is well above what the expectations for the film going into the weekend were. Film was being projected around that $50 million mark, maybe a little bit less than $50 million, maybe up to $51, $52 million. Film obviously definitely performing a lot better than expected, getting to $55 to $56 million. However, the fact still remains that this is going to be still the worst performing Planet of the Apes film in the recent history. If you go back just to even 2001's film, the Marky Mark film from 2001, this actually has the lowest, not only overall box office when you actually compare it, adjust for inflation, but most especially when you look at the average ticket prices and how many tickets probably were sold for this movie's opening weekend domestically versus what were sold for those films. We're talking about 2 million tickets less than the last film in the Caesar trilogy. So definitely a stronger than expected opening. It seems to be doing pretty well on paper, but with a budget of around $160 million, there's still a long way for this film to go if it's going to hope to not only break even, but also reach profitability, not to mention where it's going to stand in the course of the history of the Planet of the Apes franchise, at the very least in the most recent history of that project. We'll also talk about the second weekend numbers for The Fall Guy because, yeah, I liked the film. I thought it was a lot of fun. It wasn't perfect, but it was a lot of fun. And again, ultimately, this film is going to be a flop. It already is flopping. But as you all know, usually after the first 2 weeks, we're able to make some pretty firm predictions on that. So we'll talk about what the box office tracking is for that film, what the film likely will make by the end of its run, and exactly what kind of losses they can be expecting. Before going any further, please make sure you smash that like button, loud that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video live stream goes live on the channel. So, of course, we got Tony over at Deadline. Good old Tony. Blessed Mother's Day, everyone out there, by the way. I don't know why that just came to my mind just now, but Blessed Mother's Day, everyone out there. And also Blessed Feast of the Ascension for those who are in the church. But as it says, the $55 to $56 million opening is a strong, right? It's roaring to the box office, according to Tony. Moviegoers weren't monkeying around this weekend. God, I love the puns. Making a destination to cinemas to see Wes Ball's Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. The movie had a lot of gorilla testosterone and held in there on Saturday, amassing an estimated near $20 million per non-Disney sources, which is a 10% ease against its previews and Friday. Many believe that will get the 20th Century Studios sequel to $55 to $56 million at the top of the picks range. Great job, Disney, and that's off a B cinema score and 79% Rotten Tomatoes Ultimate score. And again, this is the reason why those scores just do not mean a darn thing. They haven't meant anything for a very long time. But as you all know, I go off on that cinema score all the time. It's seriously, I cannot believe that people are still using that as any legitimate metric when they have never shown exactly what kind of metrics they're using. They've never given you the raw data of how many people they've asked, what markets they're asking those people in. They just say, oh, it's a B. According to our information that we've gathered, it's a B. It's like, oh, okay, gotcha. We'll just take your word for it then. Anyway, so this is a movie that I've not been able to see all of, but let's just say I didn't want it before, and I still don't want it now. I thought the Caesar trilogy was just fine. This just seems like them trying to kind of add on to their overall profits. But honestly, it seems like this film, though it is doing definitely a lot better than what expectations were, I don't know if it's going to be able to have enough in it to make its money, right? We're living in an age now where so many of these movies cost so much money to make. And because so much of the money that is made at the box office specifically is being made in these international markets, they're not able to make their money back, right? And Disney especially has been notorious for overspending on projects. And even though this film, I will say, at least when it comes to the effects, is the best looking effects that Disney has done in years, right? Because everything Disney has made recently, especially live action, the CGI has just been garbage, has just been awful. Probably should be using whatever company you're using for this movie in your future projects, but also probably should not be spending nearly as much money on these things either, especially if they're not going to give you that return on investment. Still too early to tell officially for this movie, but I'll give you my understanding and why I think that there's a chance of it not making its money back in just a little bit. Overall, internationally, it's made around $129 million at this point. Going to Nance, good old Nance over at Deadline, it says it is down to $129 million, swinging in with $72.5 million from 52 international markets and $56.5 million domestically. The worldwide start makes it the third biggest global bow of the year. So again, oftentimes when you look at the box office numbers, these box office coverage people, they will use things like the third biggest, the biggest ever, but biggest, and they will oftentimes only put it within a specific time frame without actually giving you important context. So yes, third biggest of the global frame, but when you look at the films this year, that's really not saying a whole lot, right? There really haven't been huge moneymakers at the box office the last several years, let alone this one. And though I think that you will probably see the one film, the one bright spot, especially for Disney this year, will probably only be Deadpool and Wolverine. I don't know if we're going to see it with this film or with anything else coming out of Disney. Again, time will tell, but if you're looking for a film like the upcoming Inside Out 2, for instance, we all know Disney has lost a lot of families because of Disney Plus, because of their own political, ongoings, right? All these things have really just hurt them with the family audience. So I don't know if it's going to be able to get them back to it, but anyway, side quests out of the way. Let's go ahead and jump back into the actual numbers themselves for those wanting the numbers. So man, I'm all over the place today. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes made $56.5 million at the domestic box office. It's $13,000 per screen, so a pretty good per theater ratio there. Fall Guy, on paper, not having the worst of drop-offs that I've ever seen, dropping only 50%, but its opening was also underperforming, right? Its opening went underneath projections. $13.7 million is still just really not a lot to have in your second weekend for a film that costs as much as it did, which is why we're making some projections now that film will end up losing Universal some money. Challengers from Amazon made $4.6 million. The film that is just all over the degeneracy train when it comes to Hollywood is still doing okay. We'll again look at the updated numbers for that in a second. Let's see, we have the Tarot film, $3.4 million there. No interest in going to see that film, but we'll get the updated numbers there. That film costs a little bit more than what probably it should have cost. That might end up costing it a bit of money, but we'll jump into those numbers just to clarify that for sure. Godzilla x Kong, 7 weeks out from its initial release, dropping 44%. Just seems like this is definitely a movie that has reached towards the end of its run. It's going to start to make under $1 million a day. It's going to start to just make its way out. And we've talked about this movie, about basically the big question of whether this film made any money or not ultimately comes down to, or at least how much money this film made, is how much does the studio Legendary keep versus what it gives to the Chinese Communist Party, right? Because Legendary is Chinese owned. That's the question that we just don't really have the answer to yet. And so even with that considered in, this film is on that path, right, to being able to say it's profitable, that it made its money back. It's definitely on that path also to being one of the better performing MonsterVerse films of recent years, with the last two just not really performing all that well. But again, this is a numbers game and it's about profitability game, and so we have to take all those things into account. Unsung Hero from Lionsgate, in its third week of release, dropped 25%. This film has just been able to reach its break-even territory and also make a little bit of profit as well. Around the top 10, you've got Kung Fu Panda 4 with $2 million, Civil War with $1.8 million, so still hanging around after 5 weeks. Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, at $1.5 million. Not surprised to see an 83% drop there for a film that came out a very, very long time ago, 1,300 weeks ago, according to thenumbers.com. Yeah, people are going to go see it opening weekend in its re-release. Not as many seeing it a second time in its re-release, but again, I think that, the fact that it did as well as it did, getting into the top 5 last week was very impressive. Still in the top 10. Abigail at $1.1 million from Universal is another one of those movies also that probably cost a little bit more than it probably should have. All right, going now into Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So thenumbers.com has not updated as of the recording of this video, so it still only has the domestic numbers. But as we saw reported on Deadline, we do have those internationals, meaning the film made around, again, $129 million worldwide. Now, here is the important thing, though, to know as far as the domestic market is concerned, right? And here's the reason why I think that they should probably be concerned if they are wanting to make more films of the franchise. I think some of the rumors and speculation is that they have a whole new set of movies set in this world, set with the characters they've established in this film, some of the timing of this film as well. And before they want to do that, though, they're going to want to just not look at what Deadline is saying and what these other box office people are saying about, overperforming and the best opening that we've seen in the year, or one of the best openings that we've seen in the year. And instead, look at the actual numbers, especially within the franchise itself, right? So if we go back to 2001, right, for the Planet of the Apes reboot that was made with Mark Wahlberg, when you look at how many tickets that film sold, right? You take the average ticket price at that time compared to its domestic opening, it sold around 12.1 million tickets in its opening weekend. This also just shows you just how different the box office is today, right? How many less people, how few people are really going to see movies in today's market especially, right? So 12.1 million tickets sold for that one. For Rise of the Planet of the Apes, so we have another reboot, reimagining taking place in 2011. That sold around 6.9 million tickets, jumping all the way up to 9.1 million for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, because there was obviously a lot of hype around that film. Rise was pretty solid. Dawn was my favorite of that trilogy. War not as impressive, but 9.1 million tickets for that film, dropping in War for the Planet of the Apes, as I mentioned, to $6.2 million. And now with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, right, with the $56.5 million that's being reported, we could estimate, based off the fact that right now ticket prices are hovering around $13, $14. And for this movie especially, think about how many of those tickets that people are buying are in the IMAX screen or are in the 3D screen, if there are any, right? In the premium PVOD, right? Or not PVOD, the premium format screens, right? Those are going to raise that average ticket price. So $13 to $14 is actually a very, very fair number here. And with that taken into account, we only account for 4.3 projected million tickets, right? 4.3 million tickets. That's 2 million less than, right? 2 million less than the last film, War for the Planet of the Apes. It is a good, 5 million almost less than Dawn for the Planet of the Apes. It's about 2 to 3 million less than Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and it goes all the way down to almost 8 million less tickets versus the 2001 film with Marky Mark. Now, some of y'all might get a little bit triggered by adjusting for inflation, so I start off with the ticket prices and the ticket sales first. But just as a comparison, Dawn for the Planet of the Apes, Planet of the Apes 2001, $118 million opening weekend when you adjust for inflation, $75 million for Rise, $97 million for Dawn. So Dawn really is kind of the standard of the Caesar trilogy, and this is kind of a Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is very much an offshoot of that Caesar trilogy. War for the Planet of the Apes going down to $70 million, and this film, $56.5. Again, this film loses against every other film going back to 2001. Not just only if you look at it for inflation, but also, and some people might take this more, might think it's more credible to do the ticket price comparison, just looking at the average ticket sales. Again, no matter which category you look at, you are seeing King of the Planet of the Apes being one of the worst performing of them. And if you look at the budgets for the film, also adjusted for inflation, this is also still not the least expensive, right? Rise of the Planet of the Apes cost the least with $128 million adjusted. And so this film is right around the same amount of money as what you saw in 2001, right? With those adjusted numbers there. Not nearly as high as Dawn for the Planet of the Apes, not nearly as high as War for the Planet of the Apes. So they've saved a little bit of money there. So very surprising with Disney taking over from 20th Century Studios, 20th Century Fox, right, to actually cut prices. That's typically not their thing. But hopefully you can see, right, they are still a far cry from what the franchise used to be like, right, in both ticket sales and just in actual net revenue. And so I think that ultimately for this film, because of how much less this film has made in its domestic opening, we can extrapolate that out to the future and for the rest of its release. And so I think you'll see this film be sizably less domestically than these other films in the franchise. And that brings up the ultimate question of what will it be able to do, and will it be able to make anything at the box office? So anyway, that's the update for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. The Fall Guy is at $103 million worldwide, according to the numbers.com. Challenger's at $68 million. Taro is at $20.2 million. Godzilla X Kong at $550 million. So definitely one of the best performing films of this year. But I remind everybody who, especially as a MonsterVerse fan, a huge portion of that is coming internationally. So even though they might have a better deal in China than what the typical standard is, there's still a lot of money that's just not being picked up, that's being left on the table because of their focus being much more on that international audience, right? I think Hollywood is going to have a big problem in its hands and it does have a big problem in its hands because what it's doing is it's focusing so much time and attention on its streaming services, right, and on local streaming PVOD sales, and less time on trying to get more people to the actual theater. They've essentially said, well, since more people are going to go see it internationally anyway, let's put all of our time, all of our effort, all of our focus on trying to appease to that group. But in reality, all you're doing is you're digging your own grave because you're still spending the same amount of money, and then you're making less overall. Right? The numbers are very clear about how just much less tickets are being sold domestically for just the one franchise, not only in the case of King of the Planet of the Apes, but also this film too, right? We did some comparisons in this film's category also, and yeah, things are not looking good as far as the actual raw numbers are concerned of actual ticket sales. So they need to start fixing that. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves in a lot of trouble. Going to the projections, though, another chart because we love charts here on OMB Reviews. As I said, we can make some projections now for what The Fall Guy probably will make. So after 2 weeks, it's made $103 million. That means right now I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between $148 to $207 million worldwide. So that's the total global box office. For the film that cost around $130 million, that's nowhere near enough. Nowhere near enough. And so I think I had speculated it could be close to $100 million or even over $100 million in losses. It's looking like that is definitely going to be a possibility, right? As of right now, that means the projections are it's going to lose at best case scenario, $70 million, worst case scenario, $106 million. And this is still using, right, my own 2.5 multiplier, right? This is not taking into account, right, that random crazy charting that I like to always talk about, my RCC method, where these losses are going to be a lot higher because you have to understand that a lot less is gotten from that international market. This even saw, if you looked at Deadline's coverage of the quote-unquote most profitable films of 2023. By the way, the list is complete garbage. One of those films, or several of those films, actually lost money when you look at the real data. And so I'm definitely going to have to make let's just say, a valid alternative version of that, either here on my channel or over on the Geeks and Gamers website. So stay tuned for that. But you have to, again, look at this and you have to recognize the fact that these are just awful numbers, right? These are just not good whatsoever. And the fact is that because of so much less money being made, right, getting back to that main point, even the Deadline numbers, as I was trying to mention, even those Deadline numbers, as bad as they were, still at the very least were honest enough to admit how little the studios actually get, right? So if you don't believe my charting, if you don't trust me on these numbers, go ahead and look to his charting and see, okay, here's the global box office, but then notice what it says for theatrical revenue. It's about half, roughly, of the entire box office, okay? And that is about the same of what you would get from a film or from my charting, where it's like 55% domestic cut, 40% international cut. Again, it's going to, overall probably get out to around 50% of its entire box office. It really depends on where it's making its money. The fact still remains, though, Fall Guy right now is flopping, and it's not looking very good for that film. Taro, as I had mentioned, was on the pathway to profitability. And so this film actually is doing better. So again, I misremembered what this film was. So it had such a micro budget. It was able to make its money back there. So it is now profitable, make its money. But again, movies like that where it deals with demonic nonsense stuff, yeah, better for that stuff just not to exist in the first place. Challengers is still in the red. I don't suspect this film is, at least at this point with how it is tracking, is going to be able to make that money back, but still doing better than what they had expected. Unsung Hero has now reached a point of profitability as well, so congratulations to that. Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare is still a box office flop. Not really surprised there, especially since now it's moving to PVOD pretty early and Blu-ray sales are already available. And it was Abigail was the one I was thinking about, the horror film, right? Because that film cost $28 million versus the $8 million that Taro cost. That's the reason why this film, in the case of Abigail, right, which got up to $36 million, is still $19 million or so in the red. And so right now, those are the current numbers. So King of the Planet of the Apes right now, it's, again, looking better than expected, right? Better than what the initial projections were, but it's still got a ways to go. This film still needs to make $400+ million at the box office, right? So if you take into account a 2.5 multiplier, that's $400 million it needs to make. If you take into account a 3x multiplier, which many people do, especially because of how much more money this film will make internationally, that brings it all the way up to $480 million. So this film needs to make about somewhere between $400 and $500 million worldwide to be able to break even. And where that is absolutely a possibility, right? It is definitely has a chance to do so. Think about Godzilla x Kong, right? Godzilla x Kong right now is worldwide currently at $550 million after a $194 million global opening, $361 by week 2. So that's the real number we're going to be looking at, is how close does Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes get to the second weekend numbers for Godzilla, because that'll be a very good comparison to see just how much money it'll make. But for a film that needs to make quite a bit of money to break even, and for this now to be a fully-fledged Disney movie and Disney release, they're on the hook for a lot of cash. They're on the hook for a lot of money. So will we see another flop? Right now, it seems like that is going to be the case, since most of the money will probably be made internationally. But we'll, of course, follow that here on OMB Reviews. And so what are y'all's thoughts about these numbers, though? Are you surprised to see Kingdom for the Planet of the Apes doing as well as it did? Again, we obviously are in the month of May and getting into the summer box office. So definitely good news for theaters at the very least, right? More people going to see this movie. Good news for theaters, and so I'm always happy to hear that. But at the same time, can't take away the fact that I like seeing Disney lose money, because as a company, they just really deserve to at this point, especially if they're going to continue to put out franchise after franchise, IP after IP, and continue to not innovate in original ideas and in original technology and other ideas like that. So here's hoping. I know that next weekend we have films like The Strangers Chapter 1. Probably won't be the biggest moneymaker, if we're going to be perfectly honest there, right? It's going to be much more of a horror indie type release. But starting next weekend, we also have the release of the film If, which is going to be much more popular for the younger crowds, right? Because that's a new John Krasinski film. It's meant to be more of a family film, I believe. And so, again, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes may not be in that same category, so it might be able to keep some of its audience, but that week 2 drop will be very interesting to say the least, and we'll have the full breakdown of that next weekend. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up the fire button, awesome, smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Sunday, a blessed Feast of the Ascension, a blessed Mother's Day, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my May supporters at the Chosen of Valhalla level, starting off with my Patreon supporters, Father Luca Illich. Hail to you, Father. Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, which is Eagle Rider. And also Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. To my Subscribe Star peeps, starting off with Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name. And ZK-Man, check him out over at xtheboundaries.co. And also, lastly, to my YouTube member at the Chosen of Valhalla level, Mr. Roy, who is, of course, awesome, as all of my Chosen are amazing. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, make sure to check out the top link in the video description below. You can also get access to things like exclusive podcast and giveaways. I do a giveaways channel on Discord if you are a member at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, and a ton of other stuff. So check out more information about that in that top link below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.